So, welcome, Bekki. Thank you so much for being willing to share your birth story. This is a special one because this is the first birth story we're doing in terms of an interview with our Push Prep students. So, thank you for helping me take the plunge into this new project.
My pleasure.
Yeah, this is awesome. I was reading your story in our form and whatnot, and you had mentioned so many things that struck out for me about your birth story, um, especially the pain stuff, because you work in pain as a pharmacist, correct?
I
Yeah.
do. Yeah. So I work in pain management and manage and prescribe for pain management, not for women typically. So I work in a veteran population. So I do a lot of older men, tends to be kind of my population, but I have a deep understanding of pain.
So interesting that, this is just interesting to hear how your experience through birth and through your own experience with, labor discomfort, labor pain, however you want to call it, how your experience from both the course, but also just your career has informed you. And I'd be curious to know if anything surprised you that maybe you weren't expecting.
I was not expecting to be able to labor at home as long as I did. So I did not go to the hospital. By the time I got to the hospital, I was already 8 to 9 centimeters dilated, which was surprising to me. 'Cause I hadn't, it was one of those like, oh, this is happening like right now. Like we're in it. All right.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
isn't going to be like a long drawn out process. But then it also had a lot of things make sense for me because as to me, when I was really getting into the throes of labor pains and more progressed labor, I was like, well, let me get my ball out and try and do some of the things that I knew could kind of help with easing some discomfort from your course and other things. And I couldn't sit. And I was like, this
Mm.
ball is not comfortable. I don't know who lied to me and told me that this was going to be helpful, but like this hurts. And so then by the time when I got to the hospital, I was like, because his head's right there. No wonder that
Exactly.
hurt. Like that would have helped maybe a couple hours prior to, but at that point in time, like, no, this hurt. But I was able to really from learning a lot about from your course really, and knowing some tips myself of just kind of how to activity pacing through pain and other things, to kind of manage. I would have never anticipated laboring that long at home. My water hadn't broken though, so I think everyone was under the impression of like, oh, you've got time, like you can probably stay home a little bit longer. And I was like, no, this really is uncomfortable. I'm gonna come in. So I was glad I did because there were various things that had to happen since, but it was a lot of just kind of breathing, kind of staying active through keeping my mind busy. I learned from your course that I am someone that does not want someone to talk to me or touch me during painful
Same.
experiences. Like, leave me alone, let me breathe through this moment and kind of be internal and have my time and center myself, and then you can talk to me, but like in this moment please go away. Don't touch me. And so that
Oh.
was also helpful of just kind of like sitting and resting and allowing myself to kind of breathe through those moments or walk through,
Mhm.
whatever was I was kind of doing.
Yeah.
I also was focused on this is very silly. There was a football game that day. It was like playoffs for NFL, and our football team was playing. And I was like, I just want to watch the football game at home, and then we can go to the hospital. So I was kind of focused on like, just focus on the football game.
Oh,
This is
I love
lovely.
that. So, okay, a little couple more details. We should have opened with this. So, how long ago did you give birth and where are you located?
So I'm in New Hampshire, and I gave birth almost exactly 5 months ago.
Okay,
So he
five
was
months.
born January 8th.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's peak football season right there.
It was. We were right in the middle of it. But yeah, I think for me, it was a lot of the activity pacing, knowing that my mindset needed to be not focused on it and kind of breathing through and using whatever kind of mindfulness tips I had grown and developed over the course of my life and also through prepping for this, that I was like, all right, as long as I can stay mindful, focused, and calm, because I knew that staying calm and relaxed through the process
Yeah.
was helpful because that just let your body do what it needed to do. So that was one of the most surprising things, is that I showed up and my body had really taken care of so much of it already.
And then, so this is your first baby.
It
What
is.
happened when you got to the hospital at like 9 centimeters?
Well, they were all shocked because I walked in and they were like, "Why are you walking?" But at that point, they asked if I wanted an epidural. So I was group B strep positive. I knew I was going to need antibiotics. I also, from kind of the ice cube trick that you have us do, and my own process, I carry a lot of pain and tension in my pelvic floor.
Mm.
So one of my concerns going into it was if I was going to be able to relax my pelvic floor enough with the pain to be able to successfully birth. So I had been leaning towards an epidural, but I wasn't married to it, depending on how things were going. But at that point, I wanted to slow things down because I needed to get antibiotics into my system. I felt like I was going to vomit. And I was just kind of at this point of, okay, I need to relax that area some so that this can go all right. Hindsight, I may have made a different decision, but it did slow things down appropriately and things went fast. So we got to the hospital around 1 in the morning. By 2 o'clock, I had the epidural, which was fast. But right after that, my baby's vitals kind of shifted. So he got almost a little too comfy with the epidural and his heart rate dropped. So then they had me flipping all over like a pancake on the bed to kind of get him moving around and get his heart rate back up. So I was on all fours a lot at that point in time. And I was glad that during that time we learned I had a lot of mobility still, even with the epidural. So I was able to get in different positions and put myself in various spots to help him and help myself. We were then able to rest for a little. And by 6 o'clock, I was fully dilated and we were ready to push. So started pushing, and the nurse that I was working with was fantastic. I can't say enough about my hospital experience. They were all lovely and very progressive in the sense of, yes, let's try different birthing positions. If you don't want to be on your back, I don't want you to be on your back.
Awesome.
She brought out a peanut ball. She had a bar ready for me. She was supporting me on all fours. So we kind of pushed in various positions. I do think the epidural made it a little bit harder for me to fully feel and kind of engage and know where I was. So I was oftentimes like holding my own belly, kind of feeling my muscles so I could get some of that feedback. But one of the things that then ended up happening, so I I don't know that I allowed myself to labor down enough. And that's one of those hindsight things. It's your first time doing it and game time comes. And I was in the like, oh, it's time to push, let's push. And I forgot, like, wait, I should have listened to what my body was saying because I probably could have waited a little longer. But I ended up pushing for like 2.5 hours ultimately. And it was a long, it was a long time. But every time I would push, his heart rate would drop. So when the doctor came in, it was discovered that the cord was wrapped around his neck and kind of all over him. So whenever I pushed, it was squeezing on him.
Mm.
So we got to a point where and I was at this point just really focused on, all right, keep pushing. I was getting tired, but I was like, okay, I know I have the strength to do this. I've been preparing for God knows how long to do this. So I was really centered at that point, and I missed completely that like a NICU team had come in, and we had all of this stuff coming into the room because of some of the concerns with his heart rate. And the doctor finally kind of said, like, we got to get this baby out. I need you to do anything you have inside of you to get this baby out of you. So at that point, it was just kind of like muster up anything I've got and bear down and go. During that time, and unbeknownst to me, I also then got an episiotomy. And I think it was, they had been doing a lot of oil and stretching and, kind
Mhm.
of helping me try and stretch things out. And between his heart rate dropping and other things, I just don't think they could wait much longer. So the doctor didn't really even give us an option. It just happened. And baby came out. Fortunately, no NICU was needed. Like, he was fine, healthy. It was a very long cord, I guess, that was kind of wrapped all around him, which made sense for some of the heart rate concerns we were having. But it was afterwards that I said, like, what was the tearing concerns? Is there, how did everything go down there as you're now getting me stitched up? He's like, well, you've got a second-degree tear, but it's from the episiotomy, so it's a pretty clean tear. And I was like, oh, okay. And he informed me, and I had asked previously to, when at my practice you see a bunch of different providers, just
Mhm.
so that you're familiar with whoever you get. And they had said that really they don't do episiotomies unless it's necessary.
Mhm.
So I had that comfort going in. I will say that that was one of my concerns, was an episiotomy. Just I in being in the medical field, no, natural tearing is just oftentimes way easier to heal from, preferred for a lot of reasons. But at that point, I had a healthy baby boy on my arms, and I that didn't need to go to the NICU. So it was like, all right, we'll take this from here and figure out what has to happen. So it was a long process, and I will say that towards the end, it definitely things got a little weird and didn't go according to what we had hoped. But I think from some of your course and some of just my own experience being a little bit older going through this and having a lot of friends that have gone through birth, I didn't go in with any set like expectation or like this is my plan and it must be this way. I wanted a healthy baby in the end. I wanted to follow kind of what my body was doing and what was necessary, but I also had certain things that I would have liked to avoid if possible.
Mhm. You mentioned in your message that that was something that you have had to process.
Yeah.
Yeah. How has that impacted your postpartum journey, and how is that process? Because so many people, I'd say the majority of people, have to process elements of their birth story that they didn't think would necessarily be the case.
Yeah. So I think that for me processing it, um, just we'll just I'm a pretty open book. Sex was extremely painful,
Mm.
to the point where I had to say, like, no, stop, we cannot do this. And that was when I first was like, I've got to get to a pelvic floor PT because
Mhm.
there has been damage down there, which I knew. I healed pretty fast, so I was hopeful that maybe it wasn't going to be too bad, but I got to get to a pelvic floor PT, and I've learned a lot in that process. So there's definitely some scar tissue that we're working on kind of breaking up and loosening those restrictions. But even in my pelvic floor, I knew ahead of time that I held a lot of tension there. So a lot of the things, it's just more practice and focusing on that pressure system and really releasing it and breaking up some of the restrictions that my body's naturally held over
Mhm.
God knows how long. So that's been a certain part of the process, but that's been really helpful for me because I've learned even more exercises and things to kind of help with making that more manageable. Um, but it's been an interesting thing to kind of go through and say, all right, now I've got this extra thing to deal with. And I hold
Mhm.
on to the positives of it because so much my birth was, or my whole pregnancy was really low risk. So I was very fortunate in a lot of different senses. Um, So I try not to complain too much, but it's just different stuff where you're like, oh, now I've got this extra thing, but I'm learning a lot about myself. We as moms are a rare, strange, strong breed that just kind of like you muster it up and you do what you got to do. My husband and I have learned a lot about each other in the process, and he's been such a great support. But yeah, I think the pelvic floor PT has been a big part for me where it's allowed me to process it and not feel so trapped, because otherwise I think I would have just felt buried in this, like, oh my God, I had this episiotomy, my pelvic floor is wrecked, I can't have sex with my husband ever again, like what am I going to do? But I know that's not the case, and there's been amazing progress thus far with just going through pelvic floor PT for the amount that I have. I've been in pelvic floor PT for probably like month and a half to 2 months now. And so that's been a really amazing process for me to just learn and grow and have my body heal even more.
Mhm. What's coming up for me, it sounds like you're a bit of a silver linings person. I mean, just your
Yeah,
positivity and your outlook is really inspirational, I think, for a lot of people.
I try to be. I I have to be, and I've learned that through various things of in order to keep moving forward, right? If I get trapped in the negative stuff, I'm gonna get stuck and kind of paralyzed in my own
Mhm.
mess. So I've got to focus on the silver lining. But it was hard because sex already isn't something that's like easy for me. So it was one of those like another hurdle of, oh God, why
Yeah.
does sex have to be even harder now?
Yeah.
So it would have been really easy for me to get stuck on that, and concerns for my husband and I and our relationship. But we leaned on the other parts of it, and he was so supportive of, yeah, let's get you to a pelvic floor physical therapist. And my providers, my OB was also, because I went to her, um, just to say, like, I think this is what's going on, but let's make sure there's nothing else.
Mhm.
She confirmed that everything looks great. So this is likely just a situation of things have tightened too much and you've been through some trauma down there, and let's get it fixed.
Mhm. What would you say now to your pregnant self? Knowing the experience you had, knowing how things happened, if you could give your pregnant self, go back 6 months ago to December
Sure.
2022, what would you say to her?
You are strong. You're going to overcome a lot of things that you didn't think you could. I would probably advise her to trust her body a little bit more and maybe avoid an epidural. Only in my situation, I think for me, there were things I didn't know would happen with the epidural that I think I would have had more body control without it. I think it's great for a lot of people, and as a pain person that works with anesthesiologists, one of them even said to me, she's like, "Oh, I want to stab your back because I can feel it. You should definitely get an epidural." So I had a lot of outside sources being like, "It's great. Don't do it without it."
Mhm.
So I think some of that actually influenced me more than it I would have let it now hindsight.
Mhm.
Um, Especially because I mean, right when his vitals started to change, this instinct in me of like, oh my gosh, did I do something that's harming my baby before it's even born? As his vitals were dropping, and I didn't have control of it because it was just this medicine I put inside of me. Um, I do medicine. I manage medicines. I like medicine in the right time and place. But I think in my situation, I would have told my pregnant self, you can probably do this without it. And I would not have said that to myself prior to.
That's a lot, especially
Yeah,
given your background and given, this is something that you're also very familiar with from a educational, what's the word I'm looking for? From a clinical perspective.
correct.
Yeah. And it's really it's coming up for me that you've really had to give yourself some grace. And it sounds like you've done that, which is amazing.
I did. And it was kind of right after I even in the hospital, I think I even said to my husband, like, did I mess up by doing this epidural? And he was like, you didn't mess up anything. Like, you didn't see what I was seeing. You
Mhm.
did such a great job. And look at this kid that's here with us. Like, no bad decisions were made. It was the decisions that seemed right in the time. And here we are. But yeah, I think both of us looking back, and we've talked about it and kind of processed it together. Um, I think that was one thing that if I was going to change anything, and I wouldn't say I regret it, but if I was going to change anything, I would have allowed my body to kind of do what it was made to do.
So what advice would you give to any pregnant moms, expecting moms listening to this?
I think my biggest advice would be don't be so set on any certain thing or certain part of a birth process. Really be open to and just fill yourself with as much education as you can so that you can make the best decision for yourself in the process, but without the bias of what you think is going to be best.
Mhm.
Because while, yes, I hold tension in my pelvic floor, I think I had already shown myself that I was able to relax and breathe through it if I had really thought about it. I had been relaxing and doing things with my pelvic floor beforehand. So I think my biggest advice would just be don't even coming from someone that didn't think she was married to anything. I was pretty set on this epidural, I guess, and I should have allowed myself, well, I've gotten to 8 to 9 centimeters. Let's get this show on the road. Let's continue. I'm doing a great job. Like, let's just do this. So that would be my biggest advice. And then also just can give yourself grace. Like, things aren't going to always go as it is, or as you think it will. Give yourself grace. Rely on your partner, and hacking on is a long answer.
I like
Um,
that.
One thing that my husband and I did discuss is, I think, kind of talking through and practicing some what things would be like in the birthing experience, because things get hectic really fast. So the more practice and like almost role playing from a certain extent, because there were certain things where he was like, I forgot to remind you to like pant through some of the really painful parts, or like help try and relax you, even though he knew not to touch me. There were certain things where we had talked about what he could do. And I think we were both kind of so overwhelmed in the process that some of that was forgotten. So, as much as can be ingrained in almost second nature before you get into it, is helpful, because then you don't have to worry about remembering something while
Mhm.
you've got an entourage of
Oh
people
my
and
gosh,
your hookahs on display and everyone's walking in.
yeah.
I was at one point on all fours, and this whole team
Oh
comes in. I'm
God.
like, welcome to the party. You're seeing my best end here. You're welcome.
Oh, it's like trying to have the biggest poop of your life with an audience of like people in white
Right.
coats.
Yeah. And they all walk in, and you're just like, oh, there's more. Hi. Yeah.
Hi. Oh man. I love your vibe, Becky, and I just love like your ability to just sort of like you're like, well, we're gonna roll with this.
Here we
And
are.
and I love that you also knew in advance. You're like, was it the ice exercise? You're like, I don't want anyone touching me or talking to me.
It was. It
Yeah.
was. It was the ice exercise where I was holding the ice, and my husband was holding the ice too. And he's like trying to talk to me. I was like, would you shut up? Like, I can't talk to you right now. He was like, oh. I was like, I'm learning a lot in this
Yeah,
moment, a whole lot in this moment.
I love
So
that.
it was very insightful for me. It also made me realize, and it was from some of the exercises and kind of different Pilates things we had done beforehand, where I was then able to even realize, like, man, my pelvic floor is like this right now. Like, it is all tensed up in this moment. So then it was like practicing relaxing while also being in a state of being like, oh, this isn't comfortable.
Yeah.
So that was a really insightful exercise for both of us.
I love it. Well, you definitely did your homework.
Maybe a little too much, but it was all so helpful. And I have touted this class to just about anyone that'll listen to me, because I did learn so much from it. And as someone that's clinical, where you think like, okay, well, I have a certain understanding. Like, I want to do this because I want to know more, but I learned more than I could have ever anticipated.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that, Becky. And
Yeah.
it is an honor to help to just to know that it's been able to support you. And I just want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart. You're 5 months postpartum. You're making time to share your story for other people to listen to. And you're sharing some vulnerable stuff. So thank you. And I think you're pretty amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate everything you've done and what you're doing for this community.
We are really grateful for you to be the very first person to kick off the birth stories. So thank you for taking the plunge.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.